Hello friends, my name is Bree and welcome to that Iowa homestead. Today, we're taking it back to the basics. So you're here, you found my video, which means in some way, shape, or form, you must be wondering how to start. Or maybe you already started and you hit some unfortunate snags on the way. And that's okay. It happens. I don't think anybody out there is incapable of gardening, nor do I believe that anybody has a black thumb. What I do believe is that some people start without all the necessary tools in their toolbox to build up their gardening dreams. So in this video, I am hoping that I can give you the confidence that you need to start, or I can give you the confidence and the tools you need to try again. So what is it that plants actually need to thrive in your garden? Well, they need light, they need water, they need room to grow, and they need nutrients. Let's go ahead and start with light. There are a couple of phrases that you're going to run into in the gardening world that you should probably be familiar with if you want to be successful. Two of those phrases are partial sun and full sun. Partial sun means that your plants need 4 to 6 hours of sunlight per day and may not thrive under full sun. Full sun means that your plants need at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight per day to thrive. Now there is such a thing as too little or too much sun for your plants. Too little sun and your plants can get leggy, and your plants can sort of stretch out and get really long and skinny with weak stems in an attempt to reach for that sunlight that they desperately need. Too much sun and the leaves of your plants can wash out, or sometimes they can even develop burn spots on their leaves. Most of the plants in your average garden will require full sun, so usually this isn't an issue, but it's not a bad idea to watch for these issues to pop up, especially if you live in one of the warmer gardening zones. The next thing that your plants need to survive is water. And this is something that sounds so simple, but can in fact be a little bit tricky, because there are so many variables that go into determining how much water your plants need. Just as an example, container gardening versus in-ground gardening. If you were to take 2 tomato plants of the same variety and plant one in a container and one in the ground, you would soon find out that the watering needs of those 2 identical plants are vastly different. Containers need watering way more frequently than in-ground gardening because they dry out much quicker. Then you have to factor in things like weather and soil quality on top of that. I can easily see how all of that might seem like such a daunting task to try to figure out, but it really doesn't have to be. Now, you may have watched my irrigation video, but if you haven't, I'll go ahead and put a link to it right here, and you can check that one out right after you're finished watching this one. I have my irrigation system set to water my garden every other day from 6 a.m. till 8 a.m. But in between those waterings, I am constantly checking my plants for signs of stress. And the 2 main things that I am looking for are leaf curl and wilting. Now, just as an example, this right here is an example of what leaf curl looks like on one of my tomato plants. I'm not super worried about it. This tomato plant will be just fine. But on days when I find signs of stress like that, I will go ahead and give my plants an extra hour of water in the evening just to try to get them through those hot days. I don't water my plants in the heat of the day. I always water either first thing in the morning or in the evening after it starts to cool down. The good news is that most of the plants in your garden are going to be extremely forgiving when it comes to this, so long as you don't just completely ignore them. Now, all plants need room to grow. As you can see, I am in front of my seed starting trays here. Now, I just started some seeds in these trays a couple of days ago. Nothing has come up yet, and that's okay. It's only been a couple of days. Now, these containers will be just fine for these little plants for a short period of time, but it won't be very long until those little plants need more space than these containers can provide. After a while of a plant being stuck in a container that it has outgrown, it will become root bound. Root bound means that the roots of the plant have become a tangled mat at the bottom and sides of whatever container it is in. And this will ultimately stunt the growth of that plant. If you were to start some jalapeno plants in these, and then they got to the point where they had outgrown this container, and then you found only a little bit of time to uppot those jalapeno plants to a container like this, the few jalapeno plants that you had uppotted to here, you would notice would be exponentially larger than the plants left in these little seed starting trays. Now over time, that jalapeno plant would outgrow both of those containers, but I digress. Overcrowding can also be an issue. If you put too many plants too close together, you may end up with some leggy plants. Now, you might be thinking, Bree, didn't you just say that leggy plants was an issue of sunlight? I did, and that is still very, very true. The reason that overcrowding can cause some of your plants to get leggy is because they overshadow each other. So then those same plants then start competing for sunlight, and they do end up getting leggy. Now, whenever you buy a seed packet or a started plant, there will be information somewhere on the label that will tell you what that plant's specific spacing should be, meaning how far away that plant needs to be from other plants. It's very important that you pay attention to those guidelines to make sure that your plants are happy and healthy in your garden. Another issue that can leave your plants without a whole lot of room to grow is soil quality, especially if you have soil like clay in your garden. You will find that clay is very hard for your plants to work with. It does not leave your plants with a lot of room for their roots to develop and can cause issues with moisture retention. My garden bed was 100% clay my first year gardening. I did not know much about soil quality then, and I still have a lot to learn now. But since that first year of gardening, I have made it a habit to try to amend my soil in the fall after I pull all my plants out of the garden, and then again in the spring before I replant my garden. Since I started that habit, the quality of my soil has improved substantially. So that leads me to the last thing that your plants need: nutrients. Your plants need all kinds of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus and so much more. I still have a lot to learn in this aspect, so I'm just going to scratch the surface today. Your plants will pull a vast majority of the nutrients that they need from their roots. So you can see how soil quality is such an important factor when it comes to the garden. If you are unlucky like me and your garden bed is 100% clay like mine was, then amending your soil regularly is that much more important. It's also a really good idea to amend your soil regularly even if you have good soil to begin with. So, amending the soil. What does that actually mean? That means that you are putting nutrients back into your soil. The way that I try to accomplish that is that every fall after my gardening season is over, I go down to my local compost facility and I get a truckload full of compost and I put that on top of my garden bed and I let that sit all winter long. And then in the spring, after the last snow melts, I'll go and I'll get an equal-sized truckload full of garden soil, and I'll put that right on top of it. Now, the reason that I put that wonderful compost on my garden bed in the fall as opposed to in the spring is that if your compost is not allowed to break down for the proper amount of time before you put it on your garden bed, it can actually damage your plants. Compost is a mixture of organic matter such as food scraps, leaves, animal manure, and many other things that you can throw in there. And all of that needs to break down fully before you put it in your garden bed. If you don't allow it to break down fully before you put it into your garden bed, that compost can actually pull nitrogen out of the soil. And nitrogen is a main food source for your plants. This can actually leave your plants nitrogen deficient. Now, what does that look like for your plants? A plant that is nitrogen deficient will not grow properly. Its growth will be stunted, its stems will be weaker, and its leaves will start to turn yellow. On top of the nitrogen deficiency, As that compost breaks down, it actually releases acids into the soil. And those acids can significantly hinder your plant's root development. And unless you're doing your own compost, which is a goal of mine in the future, you really don't know how long that compost has been breaking down that you've purchased. So it's really just an overall better idea to wait to put that compost on when you know you're not going to have any plants in the ground for a few months, just to be on the safe side and avoid all those issues altogether. If my soil had been decent soil from the start, I may not even need to do that second amendment in the spring of putting the garden soil on top of that. But as I said, my garden was almost 100% clay when I first started gardening. So it is very important for me to continue amending the soil as best I can, because I still find evidence of that clay to this day. You guys, it takes a lot of time to get your soil back to a healthy level. Now, that is not to say that you can't have a productive garden with clay in your garden. I mean, I have. It just may not be as productive as it would be if your soil was in a great, healthy state. Now, if you are container gardening, you will need to take a couple additional measures to ensure that your plants are getting all the nutrients that they need. Being in confined spaces like these container plants are, they burn through the nutrients in that soil a whole lot faster than they would if they were in the ground. I like to give my container plants a little boost of fertilizer every couple of weeks just to ensure that they are getting all the nutrients that they need. This is the fertilizer that I have been using. And you just mix 1 ounce of that approximately into 1 gallon of water. And I just use your basic watering can to do it, and that works just fine. Now, I do occasionally fertilize my in-ground garden as well. Mostly though, the main 2 times that I do it would be right when I first transplant my seedlings into the garden, and then again I usually do it about halfway through the season. One last thing you need to know is your frost dates. This is very important because your frost dates are what's going to tell you when it's okay to start seeds inside, when it's okay to transplant them outdoors, when it's okay to direct sow seeds in your garden, and it's going to tell you how long your growing season is. So just to tell you, I mean, and you can look it up, just type into Google, quick Google search, frost dates for my zip code. My frost dates for the area that I'm in are April 30th to October 9th. This means that I have a 161-day growing season. If, say, you buy a seed packet that says 90 days to maturity, just as an example, that means that from the time that that seed sprouts until you get your first fruit off of that seed is going to be approximately, on average, 90 days. Now, having a 161-day growing season, I have plenty of time to get lots of great harvests off of that plant. Something to consider though when it comes to frost dates is those are just averages over all the year's recorded temperatures. So you could potentially get a frost in the spring that is way late, or your last frost in the spring could be super early. There's no real actual way to predict that. That's just an average measure that gives you approximately when is a good time to start doing your garden things outside. I think it was either last year or the year before, we had a frost in like the middle of May. And let me tell you how fun that was to deal with. All right, friends, that was a lot of information to try to get through in this video. And I could see how all of that could easily seem very overwhelming to you. But guys, I promise you, once you get going, once you get started, once you get in the habit of doing things, it's going to seem like second nature to you. And honestly, guys, if you're watching this video, if you've made it to this point in my video, you're already miles ahead of where I was when I first started. You may recall me saying that I've been gardening for 3 years. That's not entirely true. I only count the last 3 years. 4 years ago was actually the first time that I ever attempted gardening. Not 3 years ago. And that year, I basically tilled up a patch of grass in my yard. I went to Home Depot and I bought some starter plants and I planted them in that tilled up patch of ground. and then I watched it all go to weeds. Now, it is my opinion that my garden has been steadily improving every year since that first time I put a plant in the ground 4 years ago. I learn more every year. And you guys, the main thing that I learned that first year is that the garden is so forgiving. It really is. Despite the fact that I did almost zero maintenance that year, I barely even watered that garden, I still got a harvest out of that garden. The biggest thing that I hope to pass along to you guys is that there are no failures in the garden. There are only learning opportunities. In those big moments where you feel like you have failed, stop and think about what it is teaching you. What can you learn from this moment? What can you take from this experience and apply it to your future garden? One of the goals for this YouTube channel for me is to better be able to look back at what worked and what didn't. What can I take from what I did last year and apply it to this upcoming year? And it is completely okay to start small. There is nothing wrong with buying a few starter plants and growing from there. Maybe you live in an apartment and all you have room for is a few plants in your windowsill. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. You are still growing and learning from that experience. You can still save up all that knowledge and apply it to your future garden where you do have space to grow the plants you want to. Starting small and dreaming big is an amazing thing. If you can keep taking your lessons and applying them to your future gardens, I have no doubt that you will become a successful garden, and like mine, your garden will continue to improve every year. Always remember, any step forward is further than you were yesterday. Thank you for coming with me today. I'll see you soon.